It was from a Spanish management school. I was actually not provided with the Spanish management school's name. It was an actual document, so because of confidentiality reasons and ethics in translation, I was not provided with the school's name. So I will not be referring to the school as anything other than a Spanish management school. So you must be wondering what financial statements are. Financial statements are the formal records that a business, entity, or institution uses to record its financial performance or situation over a period of time. So businesses use financial statements in order to evaluate their financial performance over a period of time. And financial statements are seen to be written using a standard format, and it has four main components. The first one is a balance sheet. Then there's an income statement, a profit and loss statement, and a statement of cash flow. The Spanish management school's financial statements, of course, included these four components, along with a section that provided paragraphed information that detailed the school's financial performance between January 2002 and November 2006. Along with this section was a signature page, which I believe would be a constituting part of all financial statements. This is just like an excerpt of the financial statement. It has short-term creditors section, personnel expenses. So just to give you an idea of what a page in the financial statement would look like. Okay, so that brings me to my discussion of theory and procedure. So as you all know, units of translations can actually change throughout a translation or differ depending on the translator. You can use a word, a phrase, a sentence, and if you use a word as the unit of translation, that would go along with NIDA's formal equivalence, because this is a word-for-word translation-based procedure. And I actually read in many articles that said that specialized documents like financial statements are best translated using a formal equivalence-based procedure because of the uniformity and homogeneity and sameness and uniformity in terminological use that characterizes these documents. Formal equivalence was considered the perfect procedure to translate these documents. However, I realized maybe by the third page of the document that formal equivalence was not working for me because of the fact that literal translations, word-for-word translations of the Spanish terms that were included in this financial statements did not yield the pre-existing and established terms that were existing in an English business setting. And I'll get into that and show you examples of that after. So I decided to use a unit of thought as my unit of translation, which focuses on transferring the concept's sense as opposed to the form or grammar that formal equivalence focuses on. So my first challenge dealt with the specialized nature of the terminology found in the management school's financial statements. So in this table, you have a section that has the source term or phrase and the target term or phrase equivalent. So for example, the second word, tesorería, that was translated as liquid assets, but the commonly used translation of tesorería is treasury. At first, I translated tesorería as treasury throughout the document, but then after consulting with a native Spanish speaker, my advisor, and using parallel documents, I realized that treasury was not the appropriate word for this context. It was actually liquid assets, and I was not aware of the fact that tesorería could actually mean liquid assets. Another example is ajustes por periodificación, which was translated as accruals and prepayments. I didn't even know this phrase in English, so there was no way that I could have translated that without the use of external resources. So that was my first challenge, because of the fact that specialized documents are characterized by specificity and particularity of term use. The next challenge relates to that first one. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of some of the phrases that could have been translated. inaccurate if a literal approach or formal equivalence-oriented approach was utilized. So the first phrase is ingresos a distribuir en varios ejercicios. A literal translation of this phrase would have been income to be distributed in several years or exercises. I had actually translated ejercicios as exercises throughout my document, not knowing why exercises would even work in that context. But exercise in a financial context in English is equivalent to a year. So the actual translation and pre-established business phrase is deferred income. The name of the documents were estados financieros. A literal translation of this phrase yielded financial states, and I did not know that estados could also mean statement. So that was another thing to do with the choice of translation strategy. Empresa en funcionamiento. A literal translation of this phrase is business in functioning, which makes no sense in a business context. The actual phrase in English is going concern. So that again reiterates my point that formal equivalence or a word-for-word approach would not have been suitable for this type of document if I wanted to produce a document that contained accurate and the pre-established English business jargon. Okay. Another challenge that I dealt with was terminological consistency. With respect to date constructions, because as I said, specialized documents are characterized by precision and accuracy and uniformity and homogeneity with respect to term use and format. There were instances in my translation where I'd have January 19th, then January 19, school with a capital S and with a common S or lowercase s at times. So after revising this document, I mean, these documents are used by outside parties, and they're expected to have a certain level of uniformity. For example, competitors use these documents to see the performances of their rivals. Businesses use it to make future economic decisions. Governments use it to see if taxes declared by companies are accurate. So because of the fact that these documents are used by outside parties with such frequency, accuracy and precision and a standard format is expected to be followed. So I had to alter all of those inconsistencies with respect to date construction and capital and common letters. Some more examples of this was, for example, the word ingreso. That could be translated as revenue or income. Upon revision of my translation the first time, I realized that I had used both revenue and income throughout the translation. And as I said before, if I wanted this to seem like a professional translation job, I had to be consistent with my term use. So I had to correct all instances of revenue and change it to income so that it was consistent in terminological construction. My last problem had to do with language-based problems, and because I'm more, I don't know if I'd say more familiar now, but I was more familiar with British English. Now I'd say American English is easier for me to understand. But I wasn't familiar with any type of English with respect to business terms, actually, whether American or British. So I was trying to cater to an American English-speaking audience, and it was difficult for me to distinguish between phrases that were used in British English-speaking communities that were business communities or American business settings. So, for example, the word shareholder and the word stockholder. I don't know if I even knew the definition of that before starting, but I mean, I heard the two words before. I had stockholder throughout my document at first, and after research I realized that stockholder was actually a word that was more commonly used in Great Britain, and shareholder was more commonly used in the United States. So I changed all instances of stockholder to shareholder to cater to an American English target audience. With respect to profit and loss statement, profit and loss account and income statement. Income statement was predominantly used in the United States. Profit and loss account was predominantly used in England, and profit and loss statement was a neutral term. I decided to use the neutral one of the three, although I'm trying to cater to an American audience, just in case a British speaker were to read my translation. So, okay. So, to conclude, I received a specialized financial document, and this is a diagram that represents NIDA's translation process. So I received a source document, a specialized source document. I had to analyze and read it, and in order to transfer it into an English target language. To be able to do this, I had to find an appropriate translation procedure that would yield the established and pre-existing and authoritative English business terms, so that the translated document would still maintain the specificity of term use as did the original Spanish document. As I said before, a literal translation approach would not have worked because the established terms used in an English business setting would not have come through. So I had to restructure the document to make it sound more natural, so that I had a professional product. So to conclude, when doing literary translations in the past, and I would probably use pretty or gorgeous or beautiful to describe just the single concept of being aesthetically pleasing. In this document, I had no latitude with respect to term use. I had to use established terms, and I had no latitude with respect to consistency. It had to be consistent. So when translating a specialized document, I realized that that's a totally different process than translating a literary or other genre document, because translators have more latitude in those documents and have more, I guess, power with respect to not rewriting the document, but with respect to organizing the document how they please. And that was not the case in this situation. So although I want to translate for business settings in the future, this was a very difficult job, and I had to definitely gain familiarity with business terms to even be able to begin the project. So the entire project was a challenge. Thank you. Any questions?
Any actual questions? This is a kind of text that lets you make the most of a translation tool. Did you use any translation tool for it?
Yes, I did not use a translation tool. And that would have helped because of the fact that these texts are monotonous in terms of term use and very repetitive. But I did it without any computer assistance.
Okay. In what way didn't you use one?
When I started the project, I was not familiar with Trados. It was after I attended your class and stuff that I was gaining familiarity with it. So at the beginning, I was unfamiliar with Trados.
Great. Thank you.
Did you, you were talking about the problem of being of consistency. Did you decide at some point to set up a glossary then, so that you wouldn't, that those mistakes wouldn't happen?
Yes, I was told by Professor Cabrera, who was my advisor, that constructing a glossary at the get-go would definitely be helpful throughout the process.
Yeah, especially in this setting.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's a very ambitious project.
Thank you.
I was going to say another piggyback on another kind of tool that you could use is corpus would be great for this too, especially when you're looking at a set of documents that you can basically say, I can find a representative sample of these things. So you say, I want financial documents, American financial documents. I want to know what the terms are for those things. And you take financial documents for Spanish, and because you see that they're so consistent, you're just going to be able to naturally start to pick out those things that are frequent and are common. And it's a little bit of a connection that way would go a long ways to not being so lost as far as what's standard and what's common. You can get that commonality quite quickly usually.
Were you able to find all the terms documented in dictionaries, glossaries, or other resources, or do you have to compound certain terms in order to be able to provide a explanation for certain terms?
For certain terms, I had to compound them at first, but because I would research the term that I compounded and it was nowhere to be found on the internet, I had to definitely redo those translations. So I tried to make sure that every terminological unit that I used in the document was a pre-existing term. Because some of the concepts that were mentioned, I mean, I was unfamiliar with what they even meant. So for me to compound them would have been difficult, even though I did at first, but with revision, those were omitted.
Thank you.
That reminds me of my late answer now to Dr. Faulkner. One way to validate it, you doing this and his corpus, and then you have to do a dirty job. I mean, you have to do some research. So that's why, how to know that a platoon has 26 or 66, then so you have to do some research to do that. So that's another which is a late answer.
Yeah, that's why
It reminds me.
she had success in her translation.
Yeah.
Because she was not attached to the so she worked finding the one that was the best according to the what's up there in business.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for being here, and especially because we had such a great range of different things. We all learned from each other, so hopefully it was all coming together, what you have learned in different classes, the interconnections, and also the posters are out there. They probably provide more in-depth information if you would like